Greetings, fashion enthusiasts. Welcome to today's presentation. In response to your interest, we will explore the labor movement in the Caribbean from 1900 to 1938, marked by British colonial rule, social conflicts, and trade union activism. This history highlights the formation of trade unions, their challenges, and key influences on their development. Nesta Rabat will narrate, followed by a Q&A session.
This presentation has been brought to you by Urban Health Paradox. Stay tuned. We'll return shortly after this brief intermission.
Welcome, Nesta, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Bill, so much for having me on your show.
Now, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I am a postgraduate student who majored in Caribbean studies.
So, you have extensive scholastic knowledge in relation to the Caribbean. But before we delve into the topic at hand, I would like to pose a few questions to help our audience become acquainted with you. Could you share your age with us and where do you currently reside?
Don't you know it's rude to ask a lady her age?
Ha ha ha, I'm sorry I asked that question. Please accept my apologies.
Anyways, I live in West London, England with my two charming, well-mannered Chihuahua dogs.
That sounds delightful. I'm pleased to hear your dogs are well behaved. Now, Nesta, what motivated you to narrate the story of the labor movement?
From a young age, I have been captivated by Caribbean history. My parents, who are Jamaican, often shared stories about their roots. This background sparked my interest in the subject. However, being born in London, my understanding of Jamaica was primarily shaped by reading books in the library dedicated to the Caribbean diaspora. So, this is what made me pursue a major in Caribbean studies at university, and so that is why I'm motivated to narrate the story of the labor movement in the Caribbean.
Which aspects of Caribbean studies captivate you the most, and what motivates you to narrate this history?
There are three key aspects of history that particularly captivate me: the resilience of Caribbean people in overcoming adversity, especially the mental and physical trauma associated with the abolition of slavery, the consequences of emancipation, and the evolving social, economic, and political landscape that followed. My passion for narration stems from the profound reactions I observe in audiences. Expressions of astonishment and confusion as they grasp the struggles endured by individuals who fought for social justice, both physically and verbally. Additionally, I appreciate how sharing these stories audibly can enhance understanding of how the challenges faced by our ancestors resonate with contemporary issues, allowing us to draw parallels between the past and present struggles.
Can you explain how the spoken word has deeply influenced your emotions?
In my family, there has been a rich tradition of oral history that has persisted for generations, which is why I cherish speaking the spoken language. When I engage in this form of communication, I feel a profound connection to my inner self. This experience generates a deep energy within me that is both intuitive and spiritual. It harmonizes with my life force, allowing me to find solace regarding the injustices faced by my ancestors. It is akin to opening a window to let fresh air into one's life. The therapeutic aspect of vocalizing written words lies in the release of emotional and spiritual energies that are inherent in every individual. I can sense the emotions in my voice, responding to the sadness and helplessness conveyed by the words, which elevates me to a new level of spiritual exploration.
So, you believe that spiritual exploration through spoken word acts as therapy when it leads to positive enlightenment?
Absolutely, I firmly believe that. Once you articulate the written words, it elevates the spiritual essence of your being and helps to reconcile the wrongs, helplessness, and sorrow of the past.
Thank you, Nesta, for sharing such thought-provoking insights. It is a pleasure to have you here to discuss this compelling narrative and to gain a deeper understanding of your motivations. Before we delve into Nesta's account of the labor movement in the Caribbean, I will provide the listeners with an overview of the historical context and the underlying issues at play. As we delve into this significant historical period, we will reveal the intricate experiences of the Caribbean populace. Our objective is to offer a comprehensive analysis that highlights the struggles behind labor protests and the persistent efforts to establish strong trade unions. From 1900 to 1938, several trade unions emerged in the Caribbean, playing crucial roles in advocating for workers' rights and social justice. The notable trade unions and politicians were the Trade Union Congress, formed in 1932. The TUC aimed to unite various trade unions across the English-speaking Caribbean to promote workers' interests and international solidarity. The Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions, founded in 1938, sought to represent workers' interests and improve labor conditions in Jamaica. In Jamaica, politicians like Norman Manley, who founded the People's National Party in 1938, significantly influenced the political landscape by advocating for social democracy and republicanism. In 1894, before trade unionism took hold, the Trinidad Workingmen's Association was established and later became the Trinidad Labour Party. The Trinidad Labour Party was among the earliest organizations championing workers' rights in Trinidad. The Trinidad's Workingmen's Association played a significant role in the labor movement in Trinidad, laying the groundwork for future trade unions and labor rights advancements. These ongoing generational social and political struggles played a vital role in shaping the labor movement in the Caribbean. The primary goal was to push for improved working conditions, fair wages, and social justice. Grasping these challenges is vital for anyone seeking to understand the societal class divisions that shape the political environment, particularly benefiting students and scholars who wish to illuminate the legal precedents established in times of adversity. This essential narrative highlights the remarkable journey of the social labor movement in the Caribbean, representing a significant milestone in the history of labor union activism, particularly in overcoming severe conditions. We will also honor the indelible contributions of prominent Caribbean leaders such as Marcus Garvey, Uriah Buzz Butler, and Alexander Bustamante. Their relentless dedication to passing the torch through organization and advocacy for improved living conditions, as well as uniting the populace to assert their rights, fostered a charismatic leadership that solidified the concept of widespread black organization, political conventions, and strikes. But before we dive into Nesta's compelling narrative of Caribbean labor movement, let's take a brief interlude.
The Black Cultural Archive serves as an archive and heritage centre located in Brixton, London, focusing on the histories of individuals of African and Caribbean descent in Britain. Commonly referred to as BCA, it was established in 1981 by educationalist and historian Len Garrison along with other contributors. The mission of BCA is to document, safeguard, and honor the history of people of African descent in the United Kingdom. The newly constructed facility in Brixton, which opened its doors in 2014, facilitates access to the archival collection, offers specialized learning environments, and hosts a variety of exhibitions and events. A visit is highly recommended to experience the curated exhibitions and participate in historical lecture workshops.
And now, let us listen to Nesta as she recounts the labor movement in the Caribbean.
The labor movement before 1914 in the early 20th century, within the enchanting vistas of the Caribbean colonies, where the sea met the land and diverse cultures flourished, a starkly different reality existed for the multitude of Black and Indian laborers. These individuals faced a formidable challenge in their quest for political reform, encountering significant barriers along the way. Political ideologies were suppressed by the relentless grip of poverty, meager wages, inadequate health care, and a faltering educational system. Poverty cast a pervasive shadow over these communities, affecting not only the laborers' professional lives but also their familial circumstances. These dire conditions compelled them to seek better wages and improved working environments, driven by the aspiration to enhance their quality of life. Meanwhile, in Britain, the home state of the colonizers, the Caribbean was often idealized as a tropical paradise, with the grim realities of poverty and deplorable working conditions remaining largely unrecognized until 1936. When a British academic T.S. Syme aptly identified the Caribbean's poverty as a crucial area for social and economic inquiry, underscoring the urgent need for reform, highlighting severe poverty and poor working conditions in the region, and called for urgent social and economic reforms. Syme's political discourse marked a significant shift in how the Caribbean's socio-economic issues were perceived by British citizens and addressed in Parliament, but action was needed immediately, not prolonged reformative debates in the Houses of Lords. Caribbean laborers recognized the necessity of addressing their grievances, as well as the urgency to eradicate the severe social conditions characterized by poverty. The living conditions were harsh and unforgiving. The absence of proper housing repairs, poor sanitation, contaminated water sources, and an unhealthy diet resulted in a frightening prevalence of diseases such as tuberculosis, malaria, and hookworm. This struggle extended beyond the laborers themselves. It poignantly illustrated their suffering and the systemic obstacles they encountered daily. The resilience they demonstrated, even in the bleakest circumstances, reflects the enduring human spirit's quest for a better existence, resonating through the generations that followed. Indeed, the most straightforward method for Caribbean laborers to address issues of pay and working conditions was through organizing strikes. Strikes have a long-standing history in the Caribbean, dating back to significant events such as the Baptist War Slave Rebellion led by Samuel Sharp from 1831 to 1832 in Jamaica. Sharp had attempted to organize a strike to compel planters to emancipate enslaved individuals. Additionally, estate laborers across various Caribbean colonies initiated strikes in response to wage reductions. Similarly, East Indian indentured laborers in Guyana also sought to strike. However, these labor movements were ultimately suppressed through violent means and intimidation, which instilled fear and deterred future strike actions. Throughout the years, estate labor strikes have seen limited success, largely because of inconsistent support from trade unions. This inconsistency has facilitated the swift replacement of unskilled workers, given the plentiful supply of impoverished individuals willing to undertake the work. As sugar plantations expanded their influence, the situation deteriorated further. This shift led to a diminishing number of peasants capable of sustaining their small holdings. Land became increasingly scarce, hindering the cultivation of once abundant crops like tobacco and fruit that had provided them with minimal incomes. The looming threat of starvation drove many into agricultural labor, exacerbating their hardships. By 1900, laborers recognized the need for a thorough understanding of their collective labor activities to discuss the most significant aspects that warranted compensation beyond their current pay. The push for higher wages was supported by educated middle-class individuals like Norman Manley, who possessed a robust educational background in history. Norman Manley was to become Jamaica's statesman who served as the first and only premier of Jamaica. During the challenging times of the Great Depression and the labor unrest in 1938, Norman Manley stood in solidarity with the workers. He empathized with their plight and acknowledged the significance of organized labor. Manley was an active supporter of the trade union movement, then under the leadership of Alexander Bustamante. Manley's support went beyond simple empathy. He devoted his time and energy to help workers in their quest for improved conditions and equitable treatment. Norman Manley's relentless work connected labor activism with political leadership, significantly influencing Jamaica's journey towards independence and social equity. In September 1938, Manley helped establish the People's National Party, which became a formidable voice for workers' rights, social equity, and self-rule. The People's National Party maintained a strong connection with the Trade Union Congress and subsequently the National Workers' Union. Through this association, Manley made sure that labor issues were a priority on the political stage.
We'll take a short refreshment break now and be back right after this interlude.
Certain literary works have encountered bans or challenges in the global South. These prohibitions frequently revolve around sensitive issues pertaining to race, gender, and sexuality. The danger of such book bans lies in the negative Eurocentric perspectives that limit access to a variety of viewpoints and thought-provoking ideas. It is essential to have stimulating literature available, otherwise, when these works are obscured, our intellectual horizons become constricted, hindering our ability to cultivate empathy and engage in critical thinking. The assertion that one should simply conform and withdraw is unacceptable. Historically, the earliest documented instance of a book ban dates to approximately 221 BCE, with BCE signifying before Common Era. The motivations for these bans have typically ranged from political dissent to controversial content. In today's climate of heightened awareness, the suppression of written expression is akin to censorship. In the United Kingdom, while the scale of book bans may not be as extensive as in the United States, it is noteworthy that both nations experience a form of literary censorship, particularly concerning works that address race, racism, and sexuality. At the Windrush Channel, we are actively advocating against book bans, emphasizing the importance of ensuring that our narratives are heard and acknowledged.
Welcome back to the show. I hope you're all refreshed and ready for the next captivating segment of Nesta's recounting of the labor movement. Now, let us listen to Nesta as she recounts the trade union activism.
In tracing the roots of trade activism, we discover that the emergence of trade unions within the English-speaking Caribbean diaspora had its beginnings in craft unions. These unions initially formed among skilled artisans residing in bustling urban centers. Their collective efforts would later ripple through time, shaping the labor landscape and advocating for workers' rights. Initially, these unions emerged from friendly societies or burial clubs that collected weekly dues for support during sickness or to pay for funeral costs. Only regularly salaried workers could join. Gradually, some societies transitioned into modest-sized unions, usually comprising less than 100 members. In 1889, Jamaican carpenters, bricklayers, and cigar makers established craft unions, although many disbanded after less than 2 decades. Craft union members frequently organized strikes with the expectation that their specialized skills would make it difficult for employers to replace them. However, employers often discovered methods to resolve these strikes, including resolving the printers' union strike that Marcus Garvey played a significant role in leading in 1907. In the Caribbean, particularly in Trinidad, trade union strikes faced considerable challenges. The Trinidad Workingmen's Association, established by pharmacist Alfred Richards to represent skilled workers, disbanded following an unsuccessful waterfront strike, and it took the union a minimum of 4 years to re-establish itself. Unskilled laborers engaged in casual employment often faced significant challenges in organizing unions. However, this did not entirely deter them from initiating strike actions. A notable example is the dockworkers in British Guiana, who ceased work to demand increased wages and improved working conditions. These laborers were spearheaded by Hubert Nathaniel Critchlow, a Booker's waterfront worker. The strike garnered the backing of influential figures such as A. Thorne, a Barbadian scholar residing in British Guiana, who was a strong advocate for enhancing the conditions of the working class. In response, the government deployed troops to violently suppress the strike activities. Caribbean unionists gained significant insights into trade unionism from both Britain and the United States. Their understanding of trade union operations was enhanced by the experiences of workers returning from these nations. By the year 1900, Britain boasted over 2 million union members, and in 1901, British union leaders played a pivotal role in the establishment of the British Labour Party. By 1906, the Labour Party had successfully elected 29 members of Parliament to the House of Commons in London. In Eastern Caribbean, the British Labour Party actively supported the formation of unions in British Guiana, and for several years, the Trinidad Workingmen's Association maintained its affiliation with the British Labour Party. The initial labour unions were frail and short-lived, facing intense opposition from employers. Many of the paid personnel were from the middle class and harbored significant distrust towards trade union members. During this period, there were no legal protections for unions or any rights to strike. In the event of a dispute, colonial officials typically favored the employer's perspective, resulting in an inequitable negotiation process. This bias contributed to severe consequences in disputes, sometimes leading to fatalities. Such circumstances were pivotal in hindering the early unions from establishing a strong presence in the workplace, as both employers and the government worked together to maintain the existing order. Consequently, organizing efforts were challenging, particularly in mobilizing large groups of seasonal laborers on plantations. Indentured East Indian laborers were unable to join unions or participate in strikes due to their binding contracts. These various factors significantly stunted the growth union activities, and the unskilled laborers' lack of support from skilled workers, who were preoccupied with their own challenges, further exacerbated the situation.
We'll take a short refreshment break now and be back right after this interlude.
Our Roots by Theo Fotonla is a booklet that vividly captures Black history through detailed sketches. It features captivating drawings of prominent figures like Malcolm S., Marcus Garvey, Bob Marley, alongside fascinating illustrations of historical political leaders, royalty, and musicians, all paired with brief summaries of their achievements. The illustrations, created by cartoonist, graphic artist, and illustrator Theo Fotonla, are beautifully crafted. Theo, educated at the Kubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Art in New Jersey, USA, has had his work published in various magazines and newspapers, including Punch, This Week, and The Guardian. He is also a member of the Cartoonist and Writers Syndicate in New York. This booklet is a treasure trove, shedding light on significant Black figures throughout history in just 50 pages. It brings to life the accomplishments of our ancestors in an engaging and accessible way, making it a delightful read for the whole family. It's both educational and entertaining.
Welcome back to the show. I hope you're all refreshed and ready for the next captivating segment of Nesta's recounting on international solidarity.
The early laborers in the Caribbean lacked a comprehensive understanding of unionism, as they were not well versed in the mechanisms necessary to advance their cause. However, they gained significant insights into trade unionism by engaging with workers returning from employment in countries such as Britain and America. Through these interactions, they became aware of the critical policies and practices of trade unions, especially those aimed at safeguarding and promoting workers' rights. This essential knowledge played a crucial role in advancing the labor movement, as unionists successfully persuaded laborers to join trade unions. In Britain, over 2 million skilled workers affiliated themselves with trade unions, and by 1901, socialist leaders were insistent that these unions required an independent political party to advocate for their interests in Parliament. This led to the establishment of the British Labour Party, which emerged as a political opposition to the Conservatives and Liberals. James Ramsay MacDonald became the first Prime Minister of Britain from the Labour Party. The Trade Union Act of 1913 marked a major achievement for the British Labour Party by allowing union funds to be used for any lawful purpose. However, the party's main goal was to advance the socialist state control agenda, aiming to manage the country's primary sources of wealth, such as key industries, railways, and the banking system, for the benefit of the entire community rather than just a few wealthy individuals. The American Federation of Labor, founded by Adolph Strasser and Samuel Gompers in 1886, never formed a political party. However, after the Spanish-American War in 1898, the Unionists helped organize labor movements in Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic and were active in Jamaica as well. The British Labour Party also achieved significant milestones in the Eastern Caribbean, fostering unions in Guyana and supporting the Trinidad Workingmen's Association for several years. Trinidad was affiliated with the British Labour Party, meaning every membership fee contributed to the socialist future goal. When Joseph Poynter, a British Labour Party Member of Parliament, visited Trinidad in 1912, it gave the Trinidad Workingmen's Association considerable recognition and prestige across the island, increasing its membership subscriptions. The unions faced numerous challenges from employers, often encountering hostility and violence. Unions were typically weak and short-lived because middle-class employers, with their permanent salaries, had a significant advantage over seasonal laborers. They could hire or fire workers without much consideration. At that time, there were no laws protecting unions or granting them the right to strike, and colonial authorities generally sided with employers in disputes over working conditions. Workers had many grievances about hazardous workplaces lacking health and safety regulations, leading to deaths from heat exhaustion or machinery accidents on plantations. Laborers were not entitled to lunch or tea breaks, sick leave, or holidays. This lack of basic rights fueled the Unionists' fight for workplace improvements. Unions in the Caribbean struggled to develop effective strategies largely because organizing large groups of laborers, who often worked seasonally on agricultural estates, was a daunting task. Moreover, East Indian laborers were not permitted to join unions or strike until their indentureship contracts had ended. In contrast, unions in Britain and America enjoyed strong representation in the mining and railway industries and organizing large groups of men with relative ease. The Caribbean had far fewer options. Craft unions, for instance, faced their own challenges in securing regular full-time work and found it difficult to assist unskilled workers due to communication barriers and high levels of illiteracy.
Nesta will now discuss the creation of unions and the participation of black workers and soldiers during World War I.
The outbreak of the First World War in August 1914 brought a halt to trade union activities in the Caribbean for a long time. Special wartime laws forbade strikes since they would interfere with the production or shipping of vital supplies needed for Britain's war effort. Paradoxically, the war significantly strengthened Caribbean trade unions. Many British civil servants were called back to Britain to aid the war effort, creating numerous governmental vacancies. These positions, typically reserved for British subjects, were offered to middle-class Caribbean inhabitants. This war-induced momentum increased the number of Caribbean personnel in the civil service, police forces, and public utility companies that provided electricity, gas, water, or sewerage cleaning to the community. It was because of the war effort, British trade with the Caribbean colonies declined, which allowed Caribbean craftsmen and women to significantly boost local manufacturing of their own products. This growth led to changes in urban towns that were typically middle-class administrative and commercial hubs, transforming them into workplaces where a non-agricultural labor force could thrive and develop their skills. Consequently, the increase in urban knowledge in the Caribbean facilitated post-war union recruitment and development. A significant development in trade unionism was the recruitment of Caribbean workers to fill vacancies in Britain while British and American men fought in World War I. By 1918, around 20,000 black workers had migrated to Britain to work preparing military arsenal and to work in chemical industries, vital to the war effort. This gave them first-hand experience in corporate organization and production management. However, this knowledge came at a cost, as black seamen had to bring food to Britain on ships targeted by German submarines. The British Army made sure that World War I did not involve black workers on the front lines, but by 1915, the West Indies Regiment was formed. British officials made it clear that the West Indies Regiment was not considered part of the British Army. They were paid less and assigned to tasks such as digging trenches, cleaning latrines, doing laundry, and carrying ammunition for British soldiers. The West Indies Regiment was segregated from European soldiers and had their own canteens, cinemas, and hospitals. This subservient treatment and social exclusion led to protests among squadron leaders, leaving a lasting impact on the Caribbean future endeavors with colonialist powers. The strained interactions between the West Indies Regiment and the British Army led to plans by the West Indian Regiment sergeants to change colonial government and improve working conditions in the Caribbean after the war. Their personal experiences of racial discrimination and violence, during and after the war, fueled widespread labor unrest in the Caribbean for nearly 3 years. Out of this unrest, trade unionists and leaders of the Black racial pride movement garnered widespread support.
Thank you, Nesta, for narrating this presentation's first part on the labor movement in the Caribbean. We'll now take a short intermission break, and when we return, we'll have a question and answer session to delve deeper into the topics covered in this presentation. welcome back to the show. I hope you're feeling refreshed. Now, it's time for a question and answer session with Nesta. We have a few callers on the line with questions for Nesta. Let's start with line 1. Hello, caller. You're live on air. Could you please share your name, where you're calling from, and your question for Nesta?
Hi, my name is Caden, and I'm calling from Canada. I would like to ask Nesta if she could elaborate about the major challenges that laborers faced in the Caribbean colonies regarding inadequate home and working conditions.
They faced numerous barriers to political reform, like poverty, meager wages, inadequate health care, and a struggling educational system. These conditions impacted both their professional and family lives. Living in poverty meant constant hunger and exposure to infectious diseases like bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites.
That sounds tough. How did diseases affect them?
Yes, it was tough, because infectious diseases spread easily, with mosquitoes transmitting malaria and other diseases like dysentery spread through contaminated food or water. Tuberculosis, malaria, and hookworm were rampant due to the lack of medical treatments. Hookworm, for instance, could easily be contracted by stepping into feces with worn-out shoes, allowing the infection to spread.
Were there other health challenges?
Yes, there were other health challenges such as sexually transmitted diseases. Gonorrhea and syphilis were particularly hard to detect because there were no readily available lab testing facilities. Open relationships and lack of sex education or inadequate moral instruction made it difficult to combat the spread of these diseases.
Given these dire conditions, how did the movement leaders influence the labor movement?
These dire living conditions were crucial in advancing the labor movement. Movement leaders saw the wealthy living in luxury and argued that they were profiting off the cheap labor of the underprivileged. Additionally, laborers were often educationally unorganized and mentally unprepared for the challenges of improving their lives.
You say the workers were unorganized and mentally unprepared, but can you explain how education was a big issue back then?
The state educational system was in its infancy, with older pupils teaching younger ones without formal teaching training. There was also significant reluctance among the non-Christian population to attend Christian-run schools due to language and cultural differences, which further exacerbated illiteracy issues.
So, what you are saying is that the workers' dire conditions helped drive the labor movement forward?
Absolutely. These dire circumstances were pivotal in pushing the labor movement in the right direction, aiming for better wages, working conditions, and education.
Thank you for that insightful explanation, and Caden, I hope that answers your question comprehensively. Thanks, Caden, for calling, and now we go to line 2. Now who do we have on the line? Could you please share your name, where you're calling from, and your question for Nesta?
Good morning, everyone, and my name is Amandeep, and I am from India, and I would like to ask Nesta about how did Caribbean laborers attempt to address issues of pay and working conditions?
The most straightforward method for addressing issues of pay and working conditions was by holding a strike. Striking has a long history in the Caribbean. For instance, the Baptist War Slave Rebellion led by Samuel Sharp from 1831 to 32 in Jamaica was an attempt to organize a strike to emancipate enslaved individuals. Plantation estate laborers across various Caribbean colonies, and laborers in Guyana, also attempted strikes in response to wage reductions.
I understand. Holding a strike was an instantaneous way to disrupt operations. How did Chinese and Indian indentured laborers become involved?
They participated in strikes during the 1840s due to the harsh and exploitative conditions they endured. Despite being bound by indentured contracts, with poor working conditions, low wages, and long hours, they supported the cause by raising awareness through personal conversations and engaging in discussions and initiatives within the labor force to drive change.
It's clear why addressing pay and working conditions was crucial.
Absolutely. It was imperative for laborers to recognize and address workplace issues by applying trade unionism. Understanding how to resolve these issues often came through actual experience and problem-solving techniques. Knowing what to do logically as a collective group is where trade unionism played a key role.
Can you give an example of how unions would address workplace issues?
Sure. If there's a health and safety risk, like a machinery hazard or a tripping, slipping, or falling risk, unions knew how to deal with it proactively. They addressed these issues before they could cause harm, ensuring a safer working environment for everyone involved.
We know how unions operated in Britain, but how did early Caribbean laborers gain a better understanding of unionism?
Good question. They gained significant insights by engaging with workers who returned from employment in countries like Britain and America. These interactions made them aware of crucial policies and practices aimed at safeguarding and promoting workers' rights, which played a key role in advancing the labor movement and persuading laborers to join trade unions. Union leaders would persuade potential union members by emphasizing the benefits of membership, such as better wages, improved working conditions, and job security, along with support during illness, injury, or unemployment. They organized meetings, rallies, and demonstrations to raise awareness about workers' rights and the advantages of joining a union, fostering solidarity and collective strength among workers. Personal outreach was another strategy, with leaders visiting workers at their homes or workplaces to discuss union benefits and address any concerns. In addition to these efforts, leaders shared success stories of unions helping workers achieve better conditions and resolve disputes. They also advocated for legal protections and political reforms, demonstrating that collective action could lead to significant changes in labor laws and policies. These strategies built trust and highlighted the tangible benefits of union membership, encouraging more laborers to join and support the union movement.
Got it. So, what significant event took place in Britain in 1901 concerning trade unions?
In 1901, socialist leaders in Britain insisted that trade unions needed an independent political party to advocate for their interests in Parliament. This led to the establishment of the British Labour Party, which emerged as a political opposition to the Conservatives and Liberals, with James Ramsay MacDonald becoming the first Prime Minister from the Labour Party.
Interesting. And what was the Trade Union Act of 1913, and why was it significant for the British Labour Party?
The Trade Union Act of 1913 allowed union funds to be used for any lawful purpose. This was a major achievement for the British Labour Party, whose main goal was to advance the socialist state agenda, aiming to manage the country's key industries, railways, and banking system for the benefit of the entire community rather than just a few wealthy individuals.
Okay, I gotcha. Now, who was Joseph Poynter, and what impact did his 1912 visit to Trinidad have on the island?
Joseph Poynter, a British Labour Party Member of Parliament, was a pattern maker from Sheffield. Born in Attercliffe, he joined the Independent Labour Party and studied at Ruskin College. In 1909, after the death of Liberal MP J. Batty Langley, Poynter won the by-election, becoming Sheffield's first Labour MP. He held the seat in both 1910 general elections. Appointed as a junior whip in the House of Commons, Joseph Poynter was sent on a visit to Trinidad in 1912 on a fact-finding mission to understand the labor conditions and support the Trinidad Workingmen's Association by advising and assisting with union activism. Poynter's visit helped raise awareness and build connections between the British labor movement and Caribbean labor organizations, which gave the Trinidad Workingmen's Association considerable recognition and prestige across the island, increasing its membership subscriptions, and his presence brought international attention to the labor conditions in Trinidad, helping to legitimize and strengthen the Trinidad Workingmen's Association's efforts. Furthermore, Joseph Poynter's visit fostered stronger ties between the British labor movement and the Caribbean labor movement by raising awareness of the labor conditions in the Caribbean. His presence brought legitimacy to the Trinidad Workingmen's Association, attracting attention and support from British labor organizations. The Labour Party's decision to send Poynter to the Caribbean shows how British labor movement helped build connections, share strategies, and provide resources, ultimately strengthening the efforts of the Trinidad Workingmen's Association and enhancing collaboration between the two movements.
In what ways did the British Labour Party support labour movements in British Guiana?
The British Labour Party achieved significant milestones by encouraging unions in British Guiana. Similarly to the Trinidad Workingmen's Association, the British Labour Party supported the labour movement in British Guiana in several ways by helping to establish and support labour organisations that advocated for workers' rights. British Labour Party advocated for constitutional and political reforms that would benefit the labour movement, pushing for greater democracy and self-government, and just like the Trinidad Workingmen's Association, the Guyana Labour Party eventually affiliated with the British Labour Party. The membership fees contributed and supported the party's socialist agenda, which included promoting workers' rights and social justice. By affiliating with the British Labour Party, the fees contributed to the party's campaigns and initiatives aimed at advancing workers' rights and social justice. The British Labour Party's involvement brought legitimacy to the labour struggles in the Caribbean, as well as international union-focused solidarity. The union's support helped to strengthen the ties between the two movements and facilitate the exchange of ideas and resources.
Amandeep, do you have any other questions for Nesta?
Yes, I'd like to ask Nesta about international involvement with the labour movement. Specifically, how did unions operate in Britain, and how did early Caribbean labourers come to understand unionism better?
That is a good question. Laborers gained significant insights into trade unionism by engaging with workers returning from employment in countries like Britain and America. These interactions made them aware of critical policies and practices aimed at safeguarding and promoting workers' rights, which played a crucial role in advancing the labor movement and persuading laborers to join trade unions.
Okay, understood, but can you talk about how socialism and the British Labour Party became intertwined? What I really mean is, can you say for the record how the growing support for socialism led to the launch of the Labour Party?
The Chartist movement, which emerged in the 1830s, was instrumental in inspiring the political rights of the working class in several ways. Firstly, the People's Charter was a movement named which outlined 6 key demands: universal male suffrage, equal electoral districts, vote by ballot, annually elected parliaments, payment of members of parliament, and the abolition of property qualifications for MPs. These demands aimed to make the political system more democratic and inclusive. Secondly, mass mobilization initiated by the Chartists were the first working-class movement to mobilize on a national scale. The Chartists organized mass meetings, petitions, and demonstrations to raise awareness and pressure the government for reforms. Thirdly, political awareness about everyday life incidences helped to politicize the working class, making them aware of their rights and the importance of political representation. This awareness laid the groundwork for future labor and political movements. Fourthly, the Chartist influence on later reforms. Although the Chartist movement did not achieve all its goals immediately, it set the stage for later reforms. Many of the Chartists' demands were eventually realized, such as the secret ballot and the extension of the franchise. Lastly, the Chartist movement inspired other working-class movements in Britain and internationally, demonstrating that organized, collective action could bring about political change. It played a crucial role in advancing the political rights of the working class by advocating for democratic reforms and mobilizing workers to fight for their rights. These historical movements led to the formation of the British Labour Party in 1900, emerging from the trade union movement and socialist parties of the late 19th century. The party was created to represent the interests of the working class, who felt underrepresented by existing political parties. The Labour Representation Committee, formed by the Trades Union Congress and the Independent Labour Party, eventually became the Labour Party in 1906. The party aimed to promote workers' rights and social justice, quickly growing into a major political force in Britain.
Right.
There wasn't a Labour Party in the Houses of Commons before in 1901 socialist leaders such as Keir Hardie, a Scottish trade unionist and politician, formed the Independent Labour Party in 1893. Hardie in Britain insisted that trade unions needed an independent political party to advocate for their interests in Parliament. This led to the establishment of the British Labour Party, which emerged as a political opposition to the Conservatives and Liberals, with James Ramsay MacDonald becoming the first Prime Minister from the Labour Party.
Fascinating history, but can you explain why the Trade Union Act of 1913 was so significant for the British Labour Party and trade unionism?
Sure. As mentioned earlier, the Trade Union Act of 1913 allowed union funds to be used for any lawful purpose. The Trade Union Act of 1913 was significant because it allowed trade unions to use their funds for political purposes. Prior to this, the 1909 Osborne Judgment had restricted unions from using their funds for political activities. The 1913 Act remedied this by allowing unions to divide their subscriptions into political and social funds. However, union members who objected to political contributions had the choice to opt out of paying. This act was a major victory for the British Labour Party, as it enabled them to receive financial support from trade unions for their political campaigns and efforts to advance workers' rights. This was a major achievement for the British Labour Party, whose main goal was to advance the socialist state agenda. A socialist state control agenda aims to have the state manage and control the main sources of a country's wealth and resources. This includes key industries, railways, and the banking system. The goal is to ensure that these resources benefit the entire community, rather than just a few wealthy individuals. The socialist state agenda is about reducing economic inequality and providing everyone with access to essential services and opportunities, often through policies like nationalization and social welfare programs.
It's fantastic how you've outlined the historical connections showing how the working class movement gained a legitimate place in Parliament as the British Labour Party. Thank you for that question, Amandeep, and thanks for calling in. Now, let's go to our final caller. Hi, you're live on Urban Health Paradox. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from, and your question for Nesta.
Hey there, my name is Peter, calling from America. Thanks for having me on your show. I have a question about segregation in the British Army during World War I. Why were black soldiers not allowed to fight on the Western Front and instead relegated to tasks like cleaning latrines, doing laundry, and carrying ammunition for British soldiers? If they were more than capable of handling a rifle, why weren't they allowed to fight alongside white European soldiers, even though they were obediently following orders? Additionally, can you explain why the British Army eventually created the West Indies Regiment, but still didn't allow them to fight against Europeans? It seems absurd that they were considered soldiers in name only. Does this mean that this type of discrimination was essentially a form of racism? I hope you can help clear up my confusion and frustration. Thank you.
I can well understand your confusion and frustration about the black soldiers' role during World War I, and this might be the longest question we've had in a single question and answer session. Nesta, can you shed some light on this question for Peter?
Absolutely. Sure, I'll break it down for you. First and foremost, the segregation and treatment of black soldiers during World War I were indeed rooted in racism and the colonial attitudes prevalent at that time. In terms of segregation and discrimination, black soldiers were often kept away from fighting on the Western Front because there was a fear that letting colonial soldiers fight alongside and against white Europeans would undermine British colonial rule. This reflected the racial prejudices and stereotypes of the time, suggesting black soldiers lacked the martial spirit needed for frontline combat. In terms of auxiliary roles, despite their willingness and capability, black soldiers were usually assigned to support roles like cleaning latrines, doing laundry, and carrying ammunition. This was a way to use their labor while keeping them from gaining combat experience, which could challenge the existing racial hierarchy. In terms of the British West Indies Regiment that was formed in 1915, this regiment was a response to the need for more manpower, but also reinforced segregation. They were a separate black unit within the British Army. While they did see combat in places like Palestine and Egypt, they weren't allowed to fight on the Western Front because Britain didn't want black soldiers involved in the war against Europeans. Lastly, in terms of racism and colonialism, the discrimination faced by black soldiers was a result of the broader racism and colonialism of that era. The British Empire was built on exploiting and subjugating non-white populations, and the military was no exception. The reluctance to put black soldiers in frontline positions was a way to maintain control and prevent any challenge to the colonial order. To summarize your important question, the segregation and discriminatory practices were indeed a form of racism, deeply rooted in the colonial mindset of the time. It's a stark reminder of the injustices that have been part of history, and it's important to acknowledge and learn from these past mistakes. I hope this helps clarify things a bit more for you, Peter.
Yes, your answer really helped clarify how the discriminatory practices of colonial rulers impacted Black Caribbean soldiers. Thanks for explaining. And bye for now.
Thank you, Peter, for your question and for calling in. Unfortunately, we've reached the end of part 1 of the Urban Health Paradox presentation on the labor movement in the Caribbean. Special thanks to Nesta for her narration and for answering caller questions. Nesta will return next time to continue recounting the labor movement in the Caribbean, including the 1919 strikes, their outcomes, the formation of black organizations, and the visionary behind the Black Star Line steamship. Thank you for listening, and goodbye for now.